Good day. My name is Stephan Pretorius. I'm the Global Chief Technology Officer for WPP, and I'm here today with Amelia Gandar, WPP's Head of Agentic Strategy and Design, to talk about how we build agents. Morning, Amelia. Lovely to see you again.
You too.
So, Amelia, you've been in your role as Head of Agentic Strategy and Design for 6 months now. What has been the biggest surprise to you in those 6 months in terms of doing this role?
It's a good question. I think that it's been far more about people than about technology. And
always is, right?
Always is in a people business, strangely. And that's really surprised me. And I don't say it dismissively, but the technology is almost a means to an end. And I think with AI in particular, the clue's in the name, it's intelligent. And these systems can wrap very average ideas up in very intelligent sounding ways. And then if we use them in the same ways as everyone else, we will get the same answers as everybody else. So this is as much about helping equip a business and an entire organization to ask different questions as it is to build to get different answers, which is an inherently gnarly and quite interesting challenge.
I mean, it does sound like the sort of intellectualization of an entire workforce, right? I mean, not to be too highfalutin about it.
Yeah, it really is. And it's equipping people with enough understanding of how it works technically to enable them to get more out of it. Because fundamentally, if we end up with the same output or same answers from AI as all of our competitors, then it's a race to the bottom in terms of the advice that we give our clients. And that, to me, is a really worrying place to be.
Has there been a particular job function or type of person, type of background that have excelled at agentic design or agentic thinking to your mind? I mean, what is there, I mean, maybe it's across the board, but I mean, is there one particular role that you think is really excelling at it?
I think it's one role and one mindset, because I won't count out all of the other roles within the business. I've seen strategists flock to it, and I have a strategy background. So I think the reason for that is strategists focus on the problems that they're trying to solve, and good agents solve problems. And the exciting part of AI and agentic for me is how we can use it to solve what we couldn't solve yesterday. And that's ultimately how we create value for clients and for our teams across the business. And what sits at the heart of a strategist mindset is a curiosity to help understand the world and understand what we're trying to solve and think about the ways in which we could solve it. And so that predisposition works really well. But it tends to be the innovators that bubble up who just are prepared to ask different questions and have a go.
Ask better questions. Fantastic. So you spend a lot of your time in your role encoding best practice, marketing best practice, organizational intelligence into super agents. What has been the hardest part of that function?
We're not an industry that likes to write things down. So a lot of our knowledge exists in people's heads, and actually,
like most organizations.
Yeah, like most people-driven professional services organizations, it's accumulated experience and judgment that we've learned over time. And actually, sometimes that could be super dangerous in terms of cognitive biases and flaws in human decision making. But the intuition that comes in a creative domain and that accumulated experience is invaluable. So getting that down on paper is one thing, but it would be a mistake to think you just then train an agent to take that knowledge and do what humans can do. I think it's about looking at the underlying mechanisms of how people work. What decisions do they make? How do they make them? And then how can we use AI to bring more rather than just replicate the way in which we're able to do it today? So focusing on where humans might struggle, for instance, in the creative process is a way of encodifying or encapsulating that information to help us get to more.
But it's a really interesting kind of balance between being precise and sort of reliable and encoding best practice, and leaving enough space for flexibility and the unexpected and the sort of original, right? Yeah. Because if you do too much of the former, you just end up with something very mechanical, extremely bland, extremely boring. If you leave everything open to chance, then there's no best practice. Right?
Yeah, and it's also about not giving people too many options. Laura Weiss will often talk about the paradox of choice with AI, actually. And so you've got to hit the sweet spot between what is the role that an agent can play in the work or the part of the work that someone's doing? How do we help expand their thinking or help them make better decisions, but not overwhelm them necessarily, or not give them something that looks too good, because actually that's really dangerous in and of itself as well.
If you think about the way that we're approaching things now, I mean, what do you think is differentiated in terms of how WPP is addressing or designing agents versus what you see in the rest of the marketplace?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think the first is the approach that we've taken is really different. So we put agent building tools in the hands of 100,000 creative, curious minds 18 months ago and sort of said go. And so that's given us a huge amount of institutional learning about what works and what doesn't work in a very applied way. It's also built a level of organizational familiarity with what Agentic is and what it's capable of and what it could do for our teams and for our clients. So that's different in and of itself. We're now in the process of more strategic curation of that portfolio. And I think the things that make that different is all of our agents exist to solve a problem. And that's a really different way of thinking about Agentic, rather than starting from the task and building from the tech and working backwards. It's really saying, what are the pockets of value that an agent can help create for us, and then designing to that. Designing agents in differentiated ways. So whether that's built on codified IP, knowledge, expertise, our data and data assets, or just in the design of themselves, so that we can get to those differentiated and better answers.
You know, I think this point that you made about organizational adoption and how, and you know, the decision we made to effectively open up agent building to the entire organization, which by the way wasn't an obvious decision at the time. It was, you know, we were sort of on the knife's edge between, you know, centralizing agent building and giving it to everyone in the business. But in retrospect, I think it was by, you know, far in a country mile the best decision to make. You know, and in terms of adoption, this idea of you know, bottom up, you know, infinitely more effective than trying to do a top down and enforce things centrally. But the one thing that I think is interesting, right, is as we have started to build more capable super agents, you know, which are multi-step, lots of, you know, IP encoding, lots of tool use, you know, my experience certainly, and I've seen people respond in the same way, is the first time that you experience using a super agent, you are incredibly impressed by, you know, the amount of detail that goes into it, the chain of thought, you look at the answers, you evaluate them, and at the end of it you go, that's fantastic, right? And you know, you've maybe had some interaction with it along the way, but you basically trust the result and you then use it, right? By the third time that you're using that agent, you become lazy and you stop reading every single step. You look at the result, you use the result. And so the sort of notion of you know, laziness, you know, cognitive atrophy that could maybe happen when you're exposed to really competent, extremely good quality AI agents, is something that I've, you know, heard a lot of people talk about as a fear, right? So how does one design agents to combat or to work against cognitive atrophy? How do you design the process to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And some of the emerging research effectively shows that the better an agent is, or the agents that give near perfect answers, actually end up leading to worse outcomes when humans get involved, because we spend proportionately more time and effort trying to figure out where to intervene because they are so good at what they're doing. I had a discussion with one of our strategists about whether or not in some cases we should be building half-baked agents, and agents that intentionally get people some of the way there. So they're there to help with hypothesis generation or point people in different directions without giving people a firm or concrete answer about exactly how to solve what they're trying to do. Another way we approach it is always thinking about widening the potential options for somebody, particularly in inherently probabilistic tasks. But again, you have to be careful about the paradox of choice and not ending up overwhelming someone. I think ultimately what it comes down to is all of the work that we do is not necessarily always a set of procedural steps that we follow. It's actually a chain of decisions. and decisions that we make along the way, from understanding what problem we want to solve or should be solving in the brief, to choosing which audience to go after, which creative idea to back, how to allocate media budget. And it's about working through those decisions and saying, what role should an agent play within each of these? Where is human judgment critical? And in those situations, you build agents in a very different mechanism to how you would build an agent for a low stakes decision that's inherently deterministic, where there's a known or right answer, where actually human judgment, taste, critical thinking is less important. That's more the operator agent world. So it comes back to what decision is the human trying to make at which point in the work, and therefore what type of agent do we build to make sure that the critical judgment stays intact.
I wanted to ask you, there's obviously this massive trend recently with autonomous agents, clause, particularly, and a lot of it's come, through the evolution of agentic coding and using AI for software development. What do you think is the role of autonomous agents and potentially even Claude-like systems in marketing? Do you think it has a role, or is it something that's going to just stay in software engineering, or maybe just stay kind of in the personal computer use?
It definitely has a role. And it comes back to I increasingly think about this in terms of decisions. So where you have a low stakes, predictable decision, where there isn't an inherent amount of risk involved, let them at it. In a safe, guardrailed and governed way, of course, and obviously there's inherent risk within the way that some of these agents operate today. But assuming that you have governance and verification in hand and the house is in order, you haven't let agents run off through your files. Having an agent that operates in that environment is great. If I could have an agent to optimize my calendar for me, fantastic. But where you have decisions in the process, and in a process like ours, which is inherently creative, where there isn't a known answer, and it is probabilistic and it is judgment-based and taste-based, I wouldn't let a claw-like agent operate in that space. You can give them knowledge and skills and proprietary IP, but it's an inherently risky and high-stakes decision, which creative idea we back, or which strategic target we go after in order to help grow a client's brand. So being mindful again about the decision that is being made at each point in the work, and therefore how much autonomy or agency you give to an agent is what's really important. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much agency or how much autonomy you give to an agent, how much responsibility it has, it does not have accountability. It is no skin off an agent's back if it gets the decision wrong at the end of the day. It's the user. And that's why governance matters so much to us, is making sure that we're at the helm of what's happening, not just passively in the loop as agents work for us.
Yeah, it's very important to kind of to match the role that we play in the ecosystem to the technology we deploy, right? Because I think there's a lot of talk about, I read an article over the weekend about a venture capitalist whose personal agent had ordered new hardware for itself, thousands of dollars of new hardware to enhance its performance, and that's fantastic. But I think experimenting at the edges like that is very expensive. It costs a lot of tokens, costs a lot of hardware, and potentially also very risky, right? So it's important to kind of to be exactly at the right point of evolution based on the role that we play in the ecosystem and the responsibilities we have relative to clients, right?
Yeah, and a lot of this comes from sort of organizational behavior and how you build high-performing teams. Now, I'm not in the camp of saying that agents are pseudo people or pseudo workers, but well-functioning, high-performing teams have clear decision-making rights and responsibilities. So the question just comes back to, what decisions do we need to make? Which ones can and should an agent make? And how do we make sure we're in control of setting what success looks like for them and making sure that they've acted accordingly?
All right, some quick fires. Small agents or big agents?
It's problem and task dependent. In general, lean agents work best. And I think build as leanly as you can, and as simply as you can. The catch is simple doesn't mean simplistic.
Yes, but discrete tasks strung together.
Discrete task, yes. A task is not create a strategy.
Yeah.
A task is help me flesh out this problem to solve and then hand off to the next piece.
Great. Next one, little context or as much context as possible?
As little context as possible for
Really?
the task that's needed.
As much context as is needed for the task?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to what decision is the agent making and what does it need to know in order to make that decision? And giving an agent thousands or hundreds of thousands of words of context that may or may not be relevant to what it's doing is going to lead to suboptimal performance. So as little context as possible in order to fulfill the job that you've set it.
Great. Last one, small models or big models?
We have the same answer to all of these, aren't I? I think, again, task dependent. What are you trying to do? What does it need to know, or what patterns does it need to have within its training data in order to fulfill that task? I think there's a lot to be said for the increasing use of small models in the right circumstances and how that might interplay with bigger models where you need different capabilities in different situations.
Excellent. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you very much.